Walt probably felt he had to do Alice in Wonderland. It's just a natural for animated filmmaking.
Alice was probably the most difficult film for them to finally come up with a concrete plan of how they were going to shape it. Simply because of the source material, it is so difficult to adapt.
My name is Alice, and I'm following a white rabbit.
For a book as beloved and as familiar as it is, so much of Alice's charm is in the writing.
I have an excellent idea. Let's change the subject.
It presents very special challenges trying to adapt it to the screen.
Well, Alice in Wonderland has always been compelling fodder for filmmakers because there's so much material there. And what's interesting is that every version has been a different adaptation.
Walt Disney loved the story of Alice in Wonderland. He tried many times to make it. And it really wasn't until he saw Mary Blair's artwork that he realized he could make the film.
There are pieces of the film that are totally indelible, totally memorable. It doesn't grab your heartstrings in the same way that Bambi or Pinocchio or Dumbo does, but it's sure fun along the road.
I just look at the film and think how lucky I was to have had this very, very special experience.
Alice in Wonderland began as a story that Lewis Carroll, Charles Ludwig Dodson, told three sisters of whom he was very fond. These were the little girls, the daughters of a dean at Oxford whom he knew. And they went on a boating trip one day. It was actually rather drizzly. And to keep them amused, he began telling them a story. And he gradually expanded the story and wrote Alice's Adventures Underground, which he hand-wrote and illustrated himself as a present for Alice Little, the middle sister. And then that was expanded to form the Alice in Wonderland and subsequently Alice Through the Looking Glass that we know.
The moment Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, as it was properly called, came out in published book form, it was immediately embraced by readers such as young Oscar Wilde and Queen Victoria and children.
I think the book Alice in Wonderland is popular because it's completely absurd. And also, I think the John Tenniel illustrations are very, very striking and very memorable for people. So I think the book, in its kind of weirdness, persists because, people like weird.
As it did when it was new, still today it spans all generations. It appeals to adults on the plane of logic, puzzles, and very intrepid wordplay, but also to children it's just this amazing, almost a free-form fantasy world. It's kind of a self-guided tour of the inner workings of imagination.
And clearly Walt enjoyed and was interested in the Alice books because going back to 1923 when he made Alice's Wonderland, his first successful film, the film that kind of launched his career in animation and in filmmaking, he was going back to the Alice books.
The Alice comedies, loosely inspired by Alice's Wonderland. You have a live-action little girl, first played by Virginia Davis, and she is transported magically into the world of animated cartoons. And that series ran for several years, so Alice was there from the very, very beginning.
In the 1930s, there's a great Mickey Mouse cartoon, Through the Mirror, which is a takeoff on Alice in Wonderland, where Mickey goes through the mirror, through the looking glass, and into this crazy world where he dances with cards.
Actresses such as Mary Pickford, the Queen of Hollywood, and the silent film sweetheart of America were very interested in portraying Alice.
In the late 1930s, Walt Disney was still trying to figure out how to get Alice up on film.
There was a full story reel of the Alice film that was put together in 1939, and the artwork that's in it was pretty much all the work of an Englishman named David Hall.
David Hall's illustrations are fabulous. They owe a lot to Tenniel, but they're very, almost grotesque in some places. And there's a darkness, not perhaps as whimsical as Walt would have liked, but still, he's working on this. 1937, 1938, 1939. But then Walt's hit by World War II, and all production on Alice in Wonderland comes to a screeching halt.
And if you look at David Hall's storyboards, there are a lot of shots that wound up in the final movie 20 years later.
Let go!
Well, I'm looking for a white rabbit.
There'd been a mention of perhaps Ginger Rogers starring in a combination live-action animation Alice in Wonderland, but that went away very quickly, and all that really remains of the idea is a record album with the story and some songs, and there's a picture of Ginger Rogers as Alice in Wonderland.
Even the writer and essayist Aldous Huxley worked on a screenplay for Alice in Wonderland, and ultimately it was not proven to be successful because it was too literally an adaptation of Carol.
Clearly, Alice was something that stayed with Walt, and it took a long time for him to sort of find a way to do it.
It took 20 years for them to finally get to where they were happy with it, and it was really all because of Mary Blair's styling.
For those who don't know Mary Blair was a concept artist and art director at the Disney Studios. A concept artist would provide tons of concept paintings and color palettes that would actually inform how the entire movie looked.
Mary Blair really was what turned the film around from its original, more Tenniel-looking origins.
She influenced this movie to a great deal, as she did with Peter Pan and Cinderella.
Did you ever see such a beautiful dress?
The early 50s were really the Mary Blair years in terms of art direction and color.
Mary Blair came into her own as a unique stylist on the South American tour that she took with Walt Disney and El Grupo, as they called them, down for the Good Neighbor Policy films in the early 40s.
She had started out working in kind of a California watercolor school style. And when she went to South America, I think the colors and the patterns and the boldness of the jungles and the flowers and the birds just inspired her. And she began working in a much more stylized way with very bold graphics, very bright colors.
She did stuff that was kind of warped perspective and flattened and weird. I mean, this was really the tailor-made project for Mary Blair.
Curiouser and curiouser.
The card sequence, it's a favorite of mine. The use of gray and red, the boldness of red and black. She would just charge in there and just use colors in such a marvelous way.
She's very well thought of in animation circles, and her style and her palette especially influenced contemporary films to this day.
I'm late for a very important date.
One of the things that Walt did to make this cohesive was to give it a very strong sense of musical storytelling.
Oh, a sailor's life is a life for me.
There are more songs on screen in Disney's Alice in Wonderland than in any other Disney feature film.
Little red butterflies kiss the tulips.
The music and the look of Alice worked exceedingly well, but Walt struggled with the story.
Walt felt that there was something in this story that he dearly loved, but he didn't know what to do with it, and he kind of looked to the animators and the story people to give him something.
You had an all-star cast of animators here on this movie. You had the greats. You had Milt Kahl, you had Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston, you had Ward Kimball, and you had a lot of people alongside of them doing really, really good animation.
By that time, the animation department was run by the 9 old men, Walt Disney's key animators, who really did all the movies from the 50s through the 60s into the early 70s.
Who are you?
I hardly know, sir.
I was involved with every scene, not only with the voice part, but Walt wanted me to do the live action. And the live action is basically just for inspiration for the artists. The Mad Hatter scene comes to mind right away.
They brought in the old vaudevillian Ed Wynn to do the Mad Hatter, and he just went to town, and they recorded the sound with it as well, and he just was classic ad-libbing, horsing around.
This is the nun's birthday party.
On birthday?
Certain things would just end up happening that was not what was rehearsed.
What are you talking about? Tea? Oh, I never thought of tea, of course. Tea.
And then we'd all end up laughing and just having a great time.
Sugar, 2 spoons, just 2 spoons, thank you, yes.
And then they brought Ed Wynn back into the booth to record his lines clean. But they weren't as funny as the extemporized performance that he gave for the live-action reference.
Mustard, yes, but mustard? Don't let's be silly.
So they went back to that, and what you hear on the actual soundtrack is what he put down in that live-action reference tape.
Lemon, that's different.
They knew they were never going to get that performance again.
The film is very episodic, and because of that, it was very easy to break it up into individual segments and hand those off to individual directors.
They all try to outdo each other, so they become these vignettes of showpieces where she goes from one surreal adventure that looks fantastic and is outrageous into the next one.
It's probably an unexpected benefit. The way that the film was made is what makes it so easy to remember and to recollect and identify with those individual moments.
Alice in Wonderland, because it isn't one of the great narratives, is sometimes an easy movie to dismiss. But the more you think about it, it's actually had quite a huge effect on popular culture. You know, the images, the songs, the animation, all of that stuff really, really rests in our collective soup here. There are certain iconic moments in the movie, like the Queen of Hearts bellowing, "Off with your head!"
I'm late for a very important date. It'd be hard to find somebody who hasn't said those words a few times.
Very merry birthday to me, to me.
Oh, yeah.
The whole idea of the unbirthday is so iconic. If you walked up to anybody and said, "Sing the unbirthday song," I'll bet they could. They heighten it up in the movie too with dialogue. "Oh, it's my unbirthday too."
Today, you know, is my unbirthday.
Why, my dear, today is your unbirthday, too.
There's a lot of that kind of stuff in this movie.
When Walt Disney does a film, it just becomes part of our consciousness. You keep seeing that Disney film in the back of your mind. Walt's films have a habit of doing that.
Alice in Wonderland captivates our collective imagination. Certainly, if you go to Disneyland Park, you'll see one of the most popular rides at Disneyland, the Teacups, and the Alice in Wonderland ride.
Alice in Wonderland is the only feature film to actually have 2 attractions at Disneyland.
Lewis Carroll's characters continue to capture the imagination, and filmmakers can't seem to resist the story.
If you look at the broad spectrum of the Alice stories, there is so much richness and there are so many things to choose from that any one movie can only take a small angle of it.
Alice in Wonderland is a strong enough, popular enough book to be reinterpreted by lots of different people.
And I think that'll be the way that Alice continues for the next several hundred years. I think it's going to be something that each person that comes along with a particular approach to the storytelling and music is going to find another avenue to explore this incredibly rich story. It's almost impossible to mine it dry.